friction in wedges. Now, what is a wedge and why do we use a wedge, right? So there are two general purposes, two main reasons that we use a wedge, right? We use it to transform a force, right? Or let's say we have a force and want to transform the force into much larger forces, and in a direction that is almost perpendicular to the direction of the force we're applying, right? You want to wrap your head around this, you can think about an axe. Right? When you use an axe to cut trees, or if you, even the simplest case, even when you use a knife to cut through something, right? That edge is like a wedge. That sharp edge is like a wedge, right? You apply force in this direction, in one direction, especially in terms of an axe, when you're cutting, let's say, logs of wood, pieces of wood. You apply force in one direction, and then you are transforming that force basically with using this wedge into larger forces in approximately perpendicular to the force you apply. That's one place that you use wedge. And the other place is that you use it to slightly move something or adjust some heavy load, right? If you have some kind of, I guess the good example would be when you want to keep a door open, right? You just put a wedge in front of the door and it just holds it there, right? You want to adjust that door. Well, the door is not very heavy, but relatively speaking. So let me actually, I have two pictures. I think I took them from your textbook, so might make a better sense. This is one case, right? What I was trying to say, that transforming an applied force into much larger forces perpendicular to the force you're applying. It's almost perpendicular, right? You're applying a force in this direction. Not the best color to choose. You're applying a force in this direction. Still not the best. You're applying the force in this direction, right? In this direction. And then this is transformed into two forces almost perpendicular to the force we're applying. And also to, again, this is, I think, from your textbook, a bad quality follow I took there. This is, if you think about this small wedge there, it's just there to adjust this heavy load. To maybe you can also push it to move this heavy load, this large pipe. Another example would be just a wedge you put in front of the door to keep it open. Same story. So a wedge, you can think about it, is can be used to transform an applied force into, let's say, into much larger forces, right? Into larger forces, approximately perpendicular to the applied force. And then second case, I said you can just use it to adjust some kind of heavy load. Can be used to adjust or slightly move a heavy load, right? That's the idea. That's what wedge is. A lot of you have seen it, probably you know it already, just to make sure that we're all on the same page. All right. Now, let's take a look at what happens and how does this even relate to friction, right? You probably have now might have a good sense that when you put this wedge in front of a heavy load, why does it stand there? Well, that's where the friction comes into play, because of the friction between the wedge and the surfaces right? The force you're applying and the whole interaction between the force and friction, you're able to use the weight that you use, right? Use it. So let me bring this also picture from the figure from the textbook. That's actually a very good picture. Now, I want to look at this case, right? We have a case where we want to lift a block, say block W, so weight is W. I'm trying to lift this block, lift it up by pushing this weight underneath, right? So slightly moving it up. So you're adjusting some height in a machine, even. Right? That force actually can be some kind of screw tightening or loosening or some kind of spring pushing that force. But let's say it's a force applied to this wedge. It's a simplified version of some mechanism, and we're trying to adjust the height. And we just want to lift this block. Right? So this is the free body diagram of the wedge. Right? If you look at it this way, these are the free body diagram. This is the free body diagram of the wedge. This is the free body diagram of the block. Right? Let me write it this way. For example, consider, let's say this way, consider a case where we want to lift a block. All right. So draw the free body diagram, pay attention, how did I get these values? This is important, right? Force P is applied to the right. This is force P. There is a normal force between the wedge and the surface, N1, right? From the ground is applied to the wedge. There is a normal force from the block to the wedge. So well tilted because it should be perpendicular to the surface of contact, N2. Then you have F1 and F2. F1 is the friction between the floor and the wedge, right? Remember, friction is always trying to prevent the motion or possible motion, let's put it this way, and its direction is in a way that is making sure that it happens. Right? So if I'm pushing the wedge to the right, friction on the wedge, important, on the wedge is to the left. And there is friction between the block and the wedge and the block and the wedge and the ground, right? F1 and F2. So F1 and F2, let me write it here. F1 and F2, right, is a friction forces, frictional or friction forces between, or better to say this way, opposing the motion and motion of the wedge. Right. Now, if you draw the free body diagram for the block, right? Well, there is weight. Block is against the wall, so there is a normal force from the wall to the block, applied to the block. Block is trying to go up. See, this is the possible motion that can happen. It's impending motion. This is about to happen. When P is applied to this wedge, this block goes up. So the direction of the motion for this block, or the possible direction, would be upward. That means F3, which is the friction between the block and the wall, should be downward, preventing this motion from happening. Right? So F3 is friction force on the block from the wall, right? What else do we have on the block? Normal force that we applied from, well, basically applied by the block to the wedge. The opposite of that should be on the block applied by the wedge, right? So that's one thing. So it's N2 flipped on the block. And also the friction force that is preventing the wedge from moving, right, or the opposite direction of the motion of the wedge. We have to put that friction force on the block. Remember, this is a contact. Think about this as a machine. We are separating the parts, wedge and block. When we draw the free body diagram for the wedge, every force that is applied by the block to the wedge, the opposite of that, and we put it on the wedge, we should put the opposite, same magnitude, opposite direction of the same force on the block. Right? Equilibrium. And this is for the case when the block is going up or possibly going up. Let's put it this way. This is when block going up, or it's impending motion, the possible direction of that, when P is to the right. Now, if you wanted to lower the block down, lower it down by pulling this wedge out, right? Now, instead of that, think about it this way. If we wanted to pull it down, if this is the wedge, this is the block, and this is the wedge. If I wanted to pull this block down, I had to pull the wedge to the left. Right? If I wanted this block to go down, let's put it this way, I had to pull the wedge to the left so the block would come down. Right? Don't need that. What would have changed if I was trying to pull the wedge to the left? Looking at the free body diagram of the wedge, what would have changed? Can someone tell me? This is block going up. Now I want to look at block going down. What would have changed here? This free body diagram. Let me draw the wedge here. What things would have changed on the free body diagram for the wedge? Well, I know the force is to the left. I'm pulling it down, so this is P.
Would the direction of the friction be in reverse?
Exactly, Nathan. That's exactly what I was looking for. Thank you. Friction is always preventing the motion from happening. So if I'm trying to pull this out, then the friction forces would be in the opposite direction. These would have been my friction forces. Right, this would have been F2 and F2. The rest would have been the same, right? This is still N, and this is still N. Where to put the friction forces? Well, this is surface to surface contact, so we needed to come up with some reference point to set that to look that X that we can find. I'm not going to draw the free body diagram for the block. For the block also, since the friction was flipped, obviously, let me just draw it now. It's probably easier to draw. If you look at the free body diagram for the block, in this case, a couple of things don't change. This friction now would be in this direction because we put it on, if on the wedges is to the right, on the block should be to the left, right? So the F2. Normal is still normal. That doesn't change. This would have been N2. This normal would have been still the same. This would have been N3. Now, since the block is sliding down, the friction should be in the opposite direction. So the friction here should be upward. F3. And you have the W there. It's just the weight applied to the center of gravity. All right. So if the block is lowered, frictional forces are in opposite direction. I'll write it here. If the block is lowered, frictional forces are in opposite direction. Opposite direction. Right. Now, there is this situation that if the frictional forces hold the block in place without any P, right? Like some wedge you put in front of the door. Right? You're not applying any P there. If a wedge you put here to keep this huge pipe from rolling, you're not applying any force there. You just leave the wedge there, right? That's the situation in which the frictional forces are enough to keep this wedge in place. And that's the situation. It's called the self-lock situation. Just you can add it here, just for your own knowledge, I would say, mostly. Let's see if I can write at that bottom. If frictional forces hold the block in place, right, without P being applied, the wedge is in, or let's put it this way, the wedge is in really squeezing it here, self-lock situation. Or they say the wedge is referred to as self-lock.